Nice to meet you. How you doing?
Nice to meet you too, man. All right.
Thanks for doing this.
So you play guitar and bass, huh?
I do. I'm mostly an upright player.
Oh, okay.
But lately it's been an equal amount of everything. So yeah, I play. I'm doing a thing like 3-4 nights.
Very cool, man. Yeah. I tried to play bass once on a gig once, man, and my pinky locked on me. And that was the end of my bass playing. I was no pinky locks.
It's actually I find it's like a joy to play guitar after playing the bass because it's so
yeah. I'll always remember that. I was in Toronto and I said, well, I got something happened in the bass player something happened with the bass player. Something happened. He didn't show up or something. So I could play the bass. I mean, I got through the gig, but I didn't want to do it no more.
I get it. So for the podcast, the purpose is what we do is basically I pick an album that I think is impactful for a certain year. Year 1965. The album is Idle Moments, of course.
Right.
But in addition, I also interview someone connected to that artist, which you certainly are. And then I like to find out if it is somebody who's also doing their own thing, which you obviously are doing great. I kind of talk about your record and also your life, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Cool. So you like the Albie thing, huh?
I love. Actually, I listened to. I guess they were packaged as one album, right? The Bacharach session.
Yeah, the first pack. Yeah. They got packaged one, but now it was basically done. It had 6 tracks on the first one. But we basically got just like a full record, so it's like 11 songs on it.
Yeah, I love the entire record actually.
Cool.
Yeah, so I definitely want to ask you about some of those, but I guess that's a great place to start. Like, tell me about why Burt Bacharach. What's your affection for his music? Why did you choose him?
Well, I've always been a big fan of his, even when I was a kid. I guess growing up and hearing all those Dionne Warwick songs. I mean, Walk On By and Do You Know the Way to San Jose, and all those great tunes that he did, and I just always dug it. And actually, my dad was a fan of his too, because my dad did. What did he do? He did. I think he did Wise and Lovers too, but I think he also did. I'll Never Fall in Love Again.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually it's kind of funny because I got 2 versions of that song on the record. I got I kind of did it 2 ways. I did a kind of a modern version, rearranged a little bit, and then I did it kind of a version like he did, kind of homage to him. But no, I was just always a big fan of his, and I actually remember even in New York, they used to have these. There was this commercial. It was like I don't know what it was, like some sort of food commercial or something. But they had a Burt Bacharach song on it, and I come to hear the song later on in the Casino Royale movie with Peter Sellers and David Niven and those guys,
Right.
So like I said, I've just always been a big, huge fan of his stuff.
Did you ever meet him?
Never met him, man. That's something I wish I had. I wish he had got a chance to hear the record.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was something that was always on my plate, was wanting to meet him, and I never got a chance to meet him.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I really loved about the record, it's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you really focused on servicing the tunes first.
Right.
I mean, and then you're playing as well, but the arrangements are fantastic. Who arranged the record? Did you make those arrangements?
Me and the keyboard player, piano player, Tyrone Jackson. We sit down and did the arrangements. The horn arrangements, I let one of the horn players to do the horn arrangements. Mm-hmm. Tyrone also did the string arrangements for Alfie.
Yeah, I mean, they're just they're remarkable. Your approach to the tunes, I really enjoyed, and like as you and I both know, Burt Bacharach's music, it's deceivingly challenging.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I mean, especially tunes like Alfie and Promises, Promise. They're like even Wives and Lovers. They're tricky. They're not, you know what I mean? They're, and even I mean, we basically on Wives and Lovers, we just basically blew over what the normal changes of what was going on. And there's some changes in there. You got to make some changes quickly in there, So yeah,
They're like they're not your average jazz standards, like not something.
no, they're
Uh,
not. But I think he's one of the great American songwriters of my time coming up as a kid until now. I mean, I wasn't around. I wasn't around when Gershwin and all those guys were around, but I was around hearing him and hearing
mhm,
his stuff as a child.
right, right. So
Hmm.
your approach to improvising over those tunes, how
Hmm.
did you have a specific approach to it? I mean, I don't know. Was there a direction you were looking for in your
Well, it's funny. Not, I, I'm kind of one of those guys that it just what it was what I felt at the time. I'm one of those guys who it's almost impossible for me to play my solo back in the same way. It'll be different every time. You
right?
know what I mean? I might play some. I might play some of it. Like if I remember some of it. That's what I mean.
Hmm.
But I've never played anybody's solo note for note, and I don't even, I can't play my own solos note for note.
I don't think any of us can. Yeah, it's cool.
So, but that I mean, I just approached it, the way I kind of approached it a little bit like my old man would approach it too. I kind of had his hat on from there for a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely hear the
Mm-hmm.
influence, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tell you some of the tracks that I pointed out. "I'll Never Fall in Love Again," which I guess was from the first. Was that the first record?
Yeah, we did two versions of that. You probably got the first version with the different arrangement. Yeah.
Right, right. I mean,
Mhm.
um, the what I really like how you approach it too. You state the melody very clearly. It's like I said, the tune is always there. You never deviate
Mhm.
somewhere. You always know
Mhm.
what the song is. And your guitar tone, like beautiful on
Oh,
that
thank you.
track.
Thank you. Yeah,
Uh,
that's the D'Angelico. But I also played the I played the Epiphone Sheridan on it too,
yeah.
on a couple of songs. But it's basically the majority of it is it's that Epiphone New Yorker.
Hmm.
I got that guitar, I guess, almost 20 some years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Those
So
older.
now it's aged. The wood is aged a little bit.
No, I always found those older Epiphones to be underrated guitars.
Yes, they are, man. I mean, they were great guitars. But my own man he used Epiphones too. He used to use a Epiphone Emperor,
Hmm.
and he had the matter of fact, he had the one with it had no cutaways on it. It was huge. It was an 18-inch body, which my D'Angelico is 18-inch body too. But it was a huge guitar, and he just he loved those things.
Hmm. And then what the world needs now,
Hmm.
vocals on that one. What was your decision to do that?
It's funny. I don't know if you're old enough, but back in the day, Isaac Hayes had this record out, "Hot Buttered Soul." Remember that
Okay,
record?
I know the record. Yeah. Uh-huh.
He did that song on his record.
Okay.
So by me being a baritone, I kind of took his approach, but just put my own feel on it with but his approach vocally because that's what it was, kind of a mixture of
Hmm.
what he did and uh, and our approach to it because I wanted it funky.
Yeah.
I wanted it really funky. You know what I mean? I wanted to have that really funky groove to it. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of them that have that funky look of love. It's kind of
Hmm.
light, funky groove, and of course, Wives and Lovers. I love your treatment of that. It's almost when I listen to it, it almost conjures up sort of like some of the Hollywood arrangements to a sense, but also mixed with really soulful, funky.
Right,
A
right,
great,
right.
great approach to that track.
Yeah, it's a tricky track too. Like I said, it's a tricky track to blow over. It's not a, you know what I mean? I mean, obviously when we went to the end, we kind of went to a vamp, but blowing over those changes in the first couple bars, some interesting changes in there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then you mentioned Alfie. I just want to go to that one too. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the song for me. It almost like if you just play it without knowing it almost doesn't even make sense. Like it's like
Right,
a little bit odd melodically. The form is strange,
right, right.
and
And then when you figure out the chords, it's like I think there was one thing I think it was like a A sus or A minor to a. And then the next chord, it sounded like something. I said, "What chord is that? Well, what is he doing there?" And I, so obviously you got to figure. Yeah, I think I got to find the bass and try to figure out the chord.
but
And he did something very unusual because usually you go from minor to major, but he went minor, half step to minor, and
mm,
it tricked me. It sounded like something totally different than what it was.
right. Yeah, it's almost as if like if you went to a songwriting seminar or if you were doing a composition class in a college, that song would be one to study for sure, but it wouldn't be one you would go, if you want to write a hit song,
Right,
write this song.
right,
It's almost
right,
to me, it's always been like one of the most unlikely standards, if you will.
right.
Um, and yet it presents all these sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say problems, but challenges that really makes it. I've tried to play that song several times, and I've never felt that I've played it in a way.
Again, it's another one that's a very tricky song. I knew I had to do it. There was no way that I could do this record and not put Alfie on it. You know what I mean? Or The Look of Love.
Hmm.
I knew I had to do those songs, because they were such huge songs. So I had to put it on there, and I had this concept that I wanted to do it really old school, brushes, nothing, no sense, no electric pianos, no nothing, piano, upright bass, and strings. That was my concept on that song. That's the way I heard it. And because I wanted to have that like 50s, 60s vibe.
Definitely,
You know what I mean?
I hear it. Yeah,
Yeah, and with the strings, you know what I mean, and the strings, I automatically thought I think one of the things I was thinking about was Charlie Parker with strings.
mm,
You know what I mean, and that was what I mean because I listened that I listened that was I listened to that album a lot too, and
yeah,
so
beautiful.
and I've always been a big string guy. You know what I mean, so I would love one day to do some stuff with a symphony. That would be the ultimate for me, but.
Wow. Yeah.
Uh, uh, that was the thing I heard. I just heard it like that, and I knew that's what I had to do. So we were able to find some string players here in Atlanta,
Mhm.
and they just did a wonderful job. I mean, but they play for the symphony, so
Yeah,
they
you
know what they're
bet.
doing.
I can tell, yeah. It's funny with strings and jazz, for me, sometimes I could find it overwhelming. Other times,
Hmm.
I think it's like it's a very fine line, the blend. I think you achieved it on Alfie, and I think Charlie Parker actually did, obviously, on
Right, right, right,
strings. But there are some jazz records that, it can sort of detract if it's not done properly. So I really
right. I mean, yeah. I mean, if they're not done the proper way, you know what I mean. You don't want to have strings just to have strings. The strings there's a reason for having strings. You don't want to have strings because you think it's cool. You
yeah.
want to have strings because it's going to make the sound sound better. And that song had a lot, what I mean, with augmented stuff, and what I mean. It was just a lot of stuff that the strings could play over that I thought would be cool. Uh, and it turned out to be.
Yeah. No, it totally did.
Yeah.
So, if you were gonna do another record based on the music of one individual, have you thought about who that would be?
You know, it's funny because I was talking to some people who was talking to me the other day about it. Well, are you gonna do like a volume 3 or volume 4 of Back? I was like, I don't, probably not. I think that's kind of run its course. I wouldn't be honest to him, but I would guess my next if I did do someone else's stuff,
Mhm.
uh, I would probably do some Stevie Wonder.
I was wondering. You know what? I kind of half thought you were gonna say that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. If I did, the odds are I'm not going to do it because you can get so easily pegged in this business. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Right.
There-
You don't want to be the Burt Bacharach guy or the Stevie Wonder tribute band guy.
right. This is like, oh, that guy only makes tribute records. You know what I mean? I have to go back. You know what I mean? I have to go back to writing stuff and
Mhm.
stuff like that probably for the next project.
Right. But you knew Stevie Wonder growing up, right? He was
His parents was my next door neighbors.
right.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
grew up with Steve, and well, he's older than me, but
Mhm.
I grew up with his family. Me and his brother used to have a band together. We had a band called Hot Ice.
Okay. Hot
Yeah,
ice.
yeah, we probably we kind of stunk, but but we're just kids, and we're trying to play. But Steve used to come over to his mom's house, and we would be down there trying to practice in the basement, and he would pick up the bass because the guy that was playing Derek ended up being he was just horrible as a bass player. and but Steve would come and he would come and play the bass, but he played with one finger. He didn't play it like this. He
Oh,
went
it's
up and down the neck like this, but he was playing the right notes, just going up and down the neck with the one finger thing. And I was like, wow. you know?
yeah. Can't even imagine even trying that. Like that's
Yeah, it was really interesting. I don't know. Yeah, growing up in Detroit was quite interesting because I also was around one of the greatest bass players as far as pop music at Motown. I was around James Jamerson too.
yeah, one of my personal heroes for sure.
I would tell you this is a true story. James used to come by the house to visit my pops, and he had a brand new Cadillac Fleetwood,
Mhm.
and I was like, I think I was maybe 15. I don't even think I had my license. I was like, hey man, let me drive your car. It's okay. I mean, it was a brand new Cadillac. So I get this car and I'm driving, and because it's a new car, I knew how to drive. My grandfather taught me how to drive when I was young, but I'm trying to just be careful because it's a new car.
Right,
And we
right.
going down the street. He says, "Man, you're driving too slow." And takes his foot and mashes his foot on the mine, and the car was flying down the street. And I just freaked me out. Freaked me out. And I don't think I ever asked somebody to drive their car again. I never asked him to forget, that's for sure.
It's a great story. Yeah, not
True
one.
story, man. True
Yeah,
story.
that's hysterical. But let's go back a little bit further if we could. So your upbringing was half in St. Louis, right?
I
As
was
an
born in St. Louis. I was born in St. Louis, and then I went to New York.
okay,
I went to school in St. Louis, New York, and Detroit. We went, so because at one time my dad was living in New York, so we moved up there. We lived in
mm.
Bed-Stuy,
Oh wow, okay,
and uh, I guess my mom and my dad kind of separated, and they kind of went their own ways. I ended up back in St. Louis, and my dad had just got a house in Detroit, and he said for me to come to Detroit.
right. And
Mhm.
but your siblings went elsewhere, right? Or were they with you?
My siblings went to well, they eventually got there. All of them got to Detroit eventually, but my mom married a fellow, but nice guy too. His name was Philip Lewis, and he was Jamaican. So they ended up in Jamaica.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Which was kind of cool. You
Yeah,
know? Yeah, I never got a chance to go, but they did.
It's a different environment, I would say, right?
Yeah, yeah. I might have been playing reggae. Who knows?
So, how did you become the guitar player? When did you get inspired to try to play the guitar?
Well, I guess I was always kind of musically inclined. Uh, when I was a kid, there used to be when I lived with my grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side, and this guy used to. This was in St. Louis, and this
Mhm.
guy used to walk down the alley. He would play this blues on a harmonica, and I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. So I kept bugging my grandfather and bugging my grandfather. Finally, he bought me a harmonica.
Mhm.
And I guess in a week, a couple weeks time, I was playing what the guy was playing, and I could play what that guy was playing. I figured it out. I mean, let's not go to because I mean, harmonica is not the hardest instrument to play, but I was still playing, and I knew how to get the tones and the stuff like he was doing. And then I wanted to be a drummer.
Mhm.
Now all this is going on, I guess, when I'm not even a teenager yet.
Right.
I wanted to be a drummer because I liked all those James Brown beats. And I could play all this stuff. Uh, but what I realized that I couldn't write because I always, even as a kid, I remember I used to hear other people's music and I would put my own lyrics to it. I remember they used to have the TV Batman. I would put my own lyrics to the Batman theme. You know what I mean? So I was,
Mhm.
and uh, so because my grandfather bought me a guitar.
Yeah.
And yeah, my grandfather bought me a guitar way back then. He said, well, he's playing harmonica, he's playing music and class. Let's get him a guitar so he can, see maybe a father and dad. So I had no interest in the guitar. I tried, but it was, I didn't pick up the guitar until I was like, again, I was probably like 15.
Okay, it's pretty late. Yeah.
Yeah, I picked it up at about 15 and I started playing it. Uh, and, and how I learned to play was helping my dad move his gear in and out of these clubs. So I would be at the clubs with him. And how I learned to play was watching him and mimicking him.
Hmm.
Because my dad never really wanted me to be a musician.
Interesting.
No, he wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something like I guess most parents, they don't want to see their kids go there, especially guys like him because he had been through, he knew what it was about.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he never wanted me to actually be a musician, but so it took a while for him to take me serious. And then one point, I remember I wrote this song, and I used to rehearse his musicians sometimes because he'd be doing other stuff or he'd be upstairs doing something.
Mhm.
And I knew the melody. He knew I knew the melodies to his songs. So
Right.
I would rehearse to the musicians, and I remember I was rehearsing this keyboard player. His name was Ronnie Russian, and and at the end of the rehearsal, I was just playing something that I wrote. We just start playing it together. And my dad comes running downstairs. He's like, "Whose song is that?" And I said, "That's your son's song." And from that point on, he kind of took me serious as a player.
Wow. But no formal lessons from him or anything like that.
I would play something for him. You know what he would tell me? Man, that ain't nothing. That's not actually what he said. It said a different word, but I don't know what your podcast is like. I wouldn't say exactly what he said. But I'll tell you, it was a wise thing that he did do that. At that time, I did not understand. And he was, what I mean, he would tell me, man, that ain't crap what you playing. But what it did, it made me practice.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I would go up there and go, "We'll teach you a lesson one day." I would practice with room practicing and stuff. And that's what he did. So it was some psychology to it too. That what
Yeah.
he was doing.
Yeah, I get that. It's funny, and then obviously someone you know well. But when I interviewed George Benson, similar story. His father
Mhm.
just, he'd be playing like soul, stuff that his dad wanted was a Charlie Parker aficionado,
Hmm.
and when he heard him play, he said, "You're not playing. Why do you play this corny music?" He would tell him,
Right, right, right.
and he said it kind of pushed him to like check out Charlie Parker, and but
Yeah.
and nothing formal. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, again, they have a way of, because those guys, it was a different school. It was a different school. Matter of fact, you know, those guys came from a different school than we came in. You didn't. It was rare that somebody took you under their wing back in those days.
Hmm,
You know what I mean?
right.
They just didn't do it. Now they might like certain guys, you know what I mean, and you know what I mean, but they didn't. They really didn't, take a lot of guys under the wing. It was a different time, man. It was just a different time. I mean, it's so different now, but like I said, when I think about what he did, and I think about it now, I was like, oh, he was basically a psychologist. You know what
Yeah, there was a purpose to it.
I mean? Right, right. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think I talk to a lot of educators and musicians about this now. It seems like with the way society is now, you really have to be, like for example, I'm a music professor, so I have to be very careful the way I talk to my bass students, and
Mhm.
I can't tell them, hey, you're not really doing anything. You have to
Right.
sugarcoat
It,
everything, and I
it,
think
it
it
is. Listen, I came up at the tail end of things. I'm 67. I'll be 68 next year, and I mean next month, next year.
I was gonna say
Yeah, next month. But when I was coming up, there used to be this club in the Bronx called the Salt and Pepper Club, where all the people used to go. Dr. Lonnie would be there, and Lou Donaldson, Stanley Turrentine, all these cats would go there and play. And I was a young kid. That was when I went back to New York in the 70s. And I would go up there and then I would, play these tunes that I learned out of the fake book.
Mhm.
Where, well, the fake book could be a little deceiving. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It might, it might say, in the fake book, it might say a C7, but it's really maybe a, C7 flat nine or something. You know what I mean? And so I would go up there and I would play, and these cats be looking at you because you play these chords that you learned out of
yeah,
those books back in those days. And then when you get finished, they'll tell you, "Man, get off the stage. You don't play a second song because they didn't like what you played. Get off the stage."
right.
Now it's hard enough them kicking you off the stage, but that wasn't the worst part of it because the audience just saw you get kicked off the stage. That's the worst part of it. Now you got to walk off stage. Everybody looking, oh, you just got kicked off stage, man. You know what I mean? But that's the way those guys work. And so you would go in and you would learn that you go back and you learn that tune. Then they play something totally different. You know what I mean? It would always put you to the test. So it was Dr. Lonnie. I will never forget this, and I love this guy dearly for what he did. He said, "Man, come by my house, man. I'll show you the right turnaround and changes for these songs." And he did.
Mm,
And I will never forget that because he didn't have to do that. He did that. But I mean, I've known Lonnie since I was a kid. I've known George since I was a kid.
right.
You know what I mean? So I've known these guys forever, but he did not have to, and he did that for me. And I will always remember that night. And every time I would see him, God bless his soul, he's gone now. But every time I would see him, I would always, remind him of that. I've actually did some gigs and stuff with him, and I would always remind him of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean it does seem like every musician from a certain generation has a similar type story where
Hmm.
and I've had it as well where I've been embarrassed on stage by an
Hmm.
elder musician who I respected.
Right, right.
And it's embarrassing and it sucks.
It's totally embarrassing. I tell you, it was doing like I said, like I said, the worst part for me is like, oh my God, everybody just saw this happen to me, and I got to walk through the audience with the walk of shame for the
Right.
audience.
Yeah. and it's funny because like now I'm in a position where, and I think about this a lot. I run a jam session,
Uh,
and most of the musicians are competent and good, but every once in a while you get somebody who's not quite ready, and you don't want them. You don't want to discourage them, but yet
right,
you don't want to bring the level of the jam down to the point where the players don't want to come anymore.
right.
And it's hard, and you try to do it. It's just an all.
It's a different era. We came up in a different era
Yeah.
than because I go to jams. I haven't done jams in years. But I'll go to jams and I'll sit there and I'll watch. And the first thing I always, especially with like a lot of the young guys, you know, I always try to tell the young guys, man, because everybody wants to solo.
Yeah.
Well, soloing is great, but you have to know what you're soloing over. Learn how to comp. You know what I mean? Learn some chords. You know what I mean? Learn, different versions of these chords. Then your soloing will become much better because you know what you're soloing over.
Mhm.
You know, this is a funny story too. I got to tell you, man. A friend of mine, she was a big fan of the Grateful Dead,
Okay.
and I had never been to a Dead show in my life. And again, true story. So Bob Ware was having an after party in his room, and a friend of mine's name Phil. What was Phil's last name? He looked like Jerry Garcia. He looked just like Jerry Garcia. But he was because I'm a lefty. I'm a lefty.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah, and Phil was a lefty.
Right.
So he brought this acoustic guitar. He says, "Well, they're going to be jamming in Bob's room. Want me to bring my guitar?" I said, "Yeah, you should bring." He said, "I'll bring my guitar so you can play a little bit for him." I was like, "All right, all right."
Mhm.
So we go up there. I never met any of these guys before, so I go up there, and this guy see me with the guitar, and he walks up to me. Now, I kid you not, this guy actually said this to me. He walks up to me. He never seen me before in his life, and he says to me, "Yeah, man, but everybody's gonna be up here jamming and stuff. But I tell you what, this is how it's gonna go." He says, "You just comp behind me. I'll do all the solo."
Okay.
Well, who walks up there and says something like that to somebody in the first
Nobody.
place? Yeah. So and I kind of I said, well, I kind of know the guy's kind of he was kind of kind of a rock and roller and stuff. So I said, okay. So we went and started playing. So when I sit down and I started playing Misty. I started doing an acoustic version of Misty because I
Right.
knew it would fall on his face,
Right. Right.
and he did. You know what I mean? And and I'm saying to and and I'm saying to myself, I would have played 145 with him all night.
Mhm.
I didn't care.
Right.
But you don't come up there and say, and the only reason I'm saying that is because sometimes people get these attitudes because you know what I mean because everybody tells them how great they are. A
Yeah.
lot of the young guys,
Right.
and me included. When I came from Detroit and went to New York, I found out how great I wasn't. you
Yeah.
know. And but these guys would, what I mean, but some of these guys come from these small towns and people tell them, oh man, because you hear them, doing a pentatonic scale all over the place, and they think this, and I'm not taking anything from that.
Right.
But who walks up to somebody and says that?
It's never happened to me. I would
Yeah,
just. I think
I can believe this guy. I just cannot believe. And so then what happens as I'm playing Misty, so he puts his guitar down to go sit in the corner. Bob Ware comes and sits in front of me, crosses his legs, and just watch me play.
Mhm.
You know. And the funny thing about it, see, like I said, and I guess he was trying to impress Bob Ware. And I'm sure that's what he was trying to do. You know what I
Right. Right.
mean? But you just don't let your ego get you in trouble, man.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. That is crazy. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Who says that to somebody?
Yeah, it's probably a certain degree of insecurity, and also just like you said, hey, I want to play for Bob Ware as much as I possibly can, and
Yeah.
you know, where
But
did it
I'd never seen this guy before in my life. He'd never seen me. He don't know what I could do, and I don't know what he could do. But I had an idea what he could do when we sat down. I said, what I mean? I said, well, obviously, I'm gonna play a standard and see can he solo over that. You know what I mean?
watch the chords in here? So let me ask you about this lefty thing, because where I'm speaking to you now is my music school. I run a music school, and
Hmm.
obviously I teach some guitar. And
Hmm.
we kind of some of my teachers and I we debate this. Left when a student comes in as a lefty who's never played before, do you think it's best for him to learn as a natural lefty, or start him rough?
I think it's best for him to learn as a natural lefty.
Right,
That
right,
is that's naturally what if he's writing with his left hand,
yeah,
that's what he should be doing.
right. Because there was a school of thought for a while just to teach everyone, and I guess a lot of that has to come with the access. I mean, now it's much easier, but probably when you were coming up, finding a left-handed guitar was not so
It
easy.
was it was I didn't have I had right hand guitars that I would flip over
Right.
and flip redo the strings if I was lucky I would find one with two cutaways. So but
Gotta be
and then
some
you have to change the nut out because you know what I mean, and then and sometimes the bridge because of some of the the tail pieces were made
right.
the opposite ways. It was tricky. Uh, I remember when I finally got my first real left-handed guitar. I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, wow, this is what this is like. It's funny because also people, for some reason, I don't know why people think that it's harder to see what a left-hand player is doing than a right-hand player, and it's not.
Harder in what way?
Some people say, "Well, it's hard for me to see what you're doing because you're lefty." Why?
I don't know. Yeah, it's strange.
That makes no sense to me. I can see what you're doing, and you're righty. You know what I mean? And so I never understood that why people thought it was so hard to understand what left hand unless they were playing backwards.
Yeah,
And I can understand it.
yeah.
You know.
I actually just visually, I always like the look of a left-handed guitarist and right-handed, like the two necks going separate ways. I always thought that kind of looked kind of.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, it depends on what side of the stage you're on too. you
Uh,
know.
it's funny. So,
Mhm,
besides your father, who were some of
mhm.
your major influences coming up?
Oh, okay. I had a lot of different influences. I was a huge Yes fan. I love Steve Howe.
Me too.
Yeah, so when I was coming up, I was really into Yes. I loved Jeff Beck.
Sure.
I loved Buzzy Featon.
Hmm.
He was a great player.
Yeah.
Uh, um, I always liked those type of guys. Larry Carlton,
Mhm.
uh, and obviously George Benson. Uh, let's see, Hendrix.
Sure.
Uh, I mean, everybody. And it was even Carlos Santana. I remember it was Dividend Carlos Santana.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
absolutely.
what I mean? But Carlos has always had that great, great tone, man.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, I you know, I never had one that I could say is my favorite because I like them all. You know what I mean? And I would take little pieces from all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just jazz guys for sure. It was a
No, I wasn't there. I was in the Yes, I was in the Zeppelin.
right.
I had all the Zeppelin albums and stuff.
That's
Band
brilliant.
of Gypsies, you know. No, you got to also remember, I was in Detroit,
Mhm.
and that's Motown. So you got a lot of that Motown stuff that was going on. And you had some jazz musicians there, but you had a lot of Motown stuff that was going on. So I lived like a couple of blocks away from, like 3 blocks away from Marvin Gaye.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Gee.
So it was a lot of. I used to play football with Marvin Gaye.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was way older than us, but he always had to be the quarterback too. Gee.
Front man.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it it's the I have never been like that when that guy that tell you if it ain't jazz, it's not music. Because that's never been me. I yeah, my biggest argument with that has always been, well, if that's the case, you got to realize in the 40s and 50s and even probably some in the 60s, some of your jazz standards today were pop tunes.
Right. Yeah. And
So yeah, so that shoots that theory to hell. You know what I mean? You
yeah,
guys took pop tunes and made them jazz standards.
yeah. I mean, conceptually, that was always the tradition of jazz. It was Broadway shows, and
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
just reinterpreting popular tunes. It's just that I think, and I struggle with this now because I really have this desire to do more contemporary tunes in maybe a jazz fashion. Uh,
Hmm.
but it's also just what's within the material that you can take. But Burt Bacharach, perfect
Right,
example.
right.
There's changes and there's a structure to it that lends itself
Yeah,
well for reinterpretation.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why I said he's one of the great writers of my era, of my time. I'm obviously he's older than me, but I got a chance to listen to him when he was writing all that great material. You know what I mean? It was it was just. I tell you another guy I actually like too from there was Jimmy Webb,
Yes, underrated in a way.
underrated, but a great writer. I love the stuff he did too. Yep.
Cool, very cool. All right, so just in terms of well, this is a question I had. Your decision to change your name from Gregory to Gregory.
Mhm.
What was
That was my dad's idea.
really?
My dad, he had a friend named Doc Hyman,
Okay.
and I went to New York, and they were like, "Well, listen, ain't nobody gonna know who you Gregory Green is. You use my name. You go as Grant Green Jr." And I'm like, "Well, why?" He was like, "Well, because people still know me. They don't know you."
Mhm.
And, and that was his reason for doing it. And I'm gonna tell you something, man. Again, I don't know what his. Sometimes you got to you question guys when they do this, but when I look back at it now, again, it was almost like he had a reason for doing that. Because if I'm around and I'm still playing, and if I'm becoming, even if his name dies down, or they see his son, it's going to always help generate for
Sure.
a stage. So maybe he saw it like that. I don't know. He was wiser than I thought he was, but it was his idea. It was never my idea.
Right, right. So it's funny. I've had this discussion recently with George Coleman Jr. I've talked to Eric Mingus.
Mhm.
So and now you have a first name and a last name of one of the great guitarists in the history of the music, right? Uh,
Mhm.
what are the positives and negatives sort of associated with that?
Well, it didn't really get that positive until I got older, and I mean, that's because you get a little bit wiser and you look at things a little differently in life. The negative is that you're going to always be compared to them.
Right.
It would have been better if I played a different instrument. You know what I mean? If I played maybe bass or
Yeah.
saxophone or piano or something.
Right.
But by me playing guitar,
Mhm.
I will always be there. If I record something, they're gonna always, they can always take it and try to compare it with what my dad did. And a lot of the times, you know what I mean. You're doing something that's your own concepts. You know what I mean.
Sure.
It has nothing to do with what my dad did. that was the reason. I also used to play with a group called with Bernard Perdie and Rueben Wilson. We had this band called the Masters of Groove, and then we turned to the Godfathers of Groove.
Mhm.
And the thing with what happened when Ruben just passed, matter of fact, it was about a little bit about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Hmm.
He was a huge influence on me too. I learned a lot being on the road with those guys. But it's so easy to get pigeonholed in this business. You know what I mean? Once I started doing a lot of those organ trio things, that's all I would get calls for is organ trio stuff. And
Right.
I like way more than just that. And I know I love the organ stuff. And I think it's great. But it has its own thing. But
Mhm.
I also like bass players and keyboard players.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I like to hear real bass or
Mhm.
real bass. You know what I mean? So it's so easy to get pegged, pigeonholed, in this business.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the album covers, I mean, have a similar look to some of your father's album covers.
Well, we did do that on that. We did kind of bite off of the blue notes. Especially this last one.
Right.
I don't know if you saw the last one. It's blue.
It looks, yeah, it's cool.
Yes. Yeah, that was definitely a total. We was definitely going for that to bite off the old blue note stuff.
That's
That's definitely what that was.
right. Great.
And
So, with this record, you're gonna go tour. Are you doing some touring with it, or what's the plan?
yeah, we're gonna definitely do some touring. I'm actually we're working with a concept. I kind of want to. I think it's going to sound crazy, but it's not. No, it's not going to sound crazy. It might, but I want to. I want to go out with that string quartet.
Oh, cool.
You know what I mean? You know what I
Cool.
mean? And have them like all the horn lines. Have them play it on strings. I think that would be so cool.
Yeah, it'd be beautiful. I mean,
Yeah, just to go out, tour with a string quartet. That's what I plan on doing
that's
if I
great.
can make it happen.
Sure.
Hmm.
Um, so let's, if we could, just maybe shift gears and talk a little bit about the album "Idle Moments," if we could, a
Hmm.
little bit more about
Okay.
you. In terms of what was your dad's personality? What was he like as a person?
My dad was a big kid. He really was. I guess like most musicians, he was a big kid. You know what I mean? He was, you know, men. We grew up. It takes longer for us to grow up than women, and it takes musicians even longer. Unless you have to be there, unless you put it in a situation where you have no way around it.
Right.
But he was a prankster. I used to be like most teenagers growing up. I smoked pot, and I remember one time I bought this pot, and my dad hated me smoking pot because he didn't, he was because he had went through his drug phase back then. Like everyone, all those guys in that era, they all had heroin problems. And he went through his problems along with all those guys. Matter of fact, it was like a club. If you didn't do it, then a lot of those guys didn't even trust you. So I remember once I bought some pot. This is his weird way of doing things. And I bought the pot. I got stoned, and I remember he had this cool leather coat that I really liked, and I had his leather coat on. And I remember I got the pot. I got stoned. I put the pot in the coat pocket. Went home, took the coat off, hung it in the closet, and went to bed. Well, I woke up that morning. I could hear my dad running in the house. I didn't think he was coming in. I thought he was coming in like maybe next week or something.
Yeah.
And I'm laying in bed. I said, "Oh shit! Let me get downstairs and get that out of the pocket." So I run downstairs. He's gone. The coat's gone. And I'm a teenager. You know what I mean? I'm young.
Right.
I'm like, oh God, I'm never gonna hear the end of this. Here we go. You know what I mean? So he comes home. He doesn't say a word. I'm like, maybe he didn't check the pockets. So when he goes up and settles down, I run downstairs, I check the pockets, no pot. Now, I know I put the pot in there.
Right.
So like, all right, now he's just gonna wait for buy his time before he starts to get at me.
Right.
One day goes by, say nothing. 2 days go by, they say nothing. I was so messed up in the head, I wouldn't check the pocket again. I knew it wasn't. I said, wait, that's it.
Right. You figure he's gonna say something at this point.
Yeah, at this point. And you know what I mean? After about 3 days, I couldn't take it no more. So I said to him, I said, hey man, did you find anything in your coat pocket? He says, yeah, I found your weed. I gave it to the guys in the band.
And that was it. That's funny.
So I mean, he was kind of he was a joke. He was really a funny cat. We used to laugh at it because for a guy to be as musically inclined as he was the worst dancer we ever seen.
Really?
We would just burst out laughing when he started dancing because it was so terrible. And that was something I always like. I say, he's this great musician and rhythm and stuff. I guess it's only in his hands because the rest of his body's doing something else. Yeah, man. Yeah, he was a funny guy though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other fond memories of him you'd like to share? What was his other interests besides dancing poorly and
He loved movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we used to like go to the drive-in theater and and he was like one of those kind of guys. I'm telling you, he was like a big kid sometimes. I was, hey dad, can I get some money? I want to go to the movies. He was like, I ain't got no money. I said, come on, man, let me get some, because I know you got a pocket full of money. I said, come on.
You just got off last night. I know they paid you.
Yeah, so I was like, no, man, I ain't got no money. So we would just, as kids, we would just go in his pocket and take his money out. And he'd be sitting there in front of his friends, right? And look at his friends and say, my own kids have no respect. Just reach my pocket, just take my money. Because we know he had it. He was just giving that just to mess with us, you know what I mean?
A lot of taking things out of pockets, it seems, in your household.
Yes, well, that's the way it was back then. I never put weed in that coat pocket again. I tell you that was for sure.
Make the band happy, I guess that's about it.
Yeah, they always happy because they were all pot smokers like me. But I will also say this: you were talking about the idle moment thing,
right?
And I love that record. I think that was one of my it was just a beautifully done record. And there's a little bit there too, and I'm not saying I took it from I guess not really. I always loved vibes and guitars playing melody. It's something about those two tones that go together that just, when they play a melody together, it's like magic to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a thing that struck me, one of the many things that strikes me about that record. Not only the vibes and the guitar, but then the piano.
Mm-hmm.
Having those three rhythm instruments that are also, very melodic as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a specific blend on that record. There's a feel that I don't know. It's just there's some kind of something in the ether of that record that.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of those records where it was sometimes musicians sometimes they get to a point where they kind of forget. In other words, sometimes they play for other musicians instead of for the audience.
Right.
And I think on that record, because my old man always played differently live than he played on the records.
Mhm.
You know, if you wanted to learn anything from him, you would have to see him play live. You know what I mean? For me, especially now, mind you, I was, you know, learning the stuff from him in the '70s. I think in the '60s, especially the early '60s stuff, where you know he was playing a lot more bebop stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, but probably even then, because I'll tell you why. Now, some guys, you know, some guys do this can, but I tell you why, and it's a simple reason that people play stronger live than they do in on recordings, is because they're feeding off the audience.
Right.
If the audience is into it, and they, you know what I mean, you see, you got the audience going, that's pushing you. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
There's an
So
energy, a different energy playing
yeah,
live.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, yeah, there was definitely some. I guess I can say that. Yeah, it was definitely a little influence of idle moments with this record, because I use a lot of vibes on this record, so it was kind of a little thing from idle moments. I guess that's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just always loved the tone of that. Like I said, the tone of guitar and vibes has always knocked me out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and not just any vibes player. I mean, Bobby Hutcherson, who's
Bobby Hutcherson's voice, yeah,
the vibes player at the time, you know.
yes, yes, he was. Yeah, so it was. And I kind of, that's why, you know, that's why I definitely, you know, that's why you got, you know, you got the vibes, especially on Alfie and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Promises, promises. You know what I mean? You got the
Mhm.
vibes and stuff. It's just, it's, and that's kind of a take from, I guess it is from I
Right.
probably was embedded in my mind all the time. You know what I mean?
I don't know. You could hear it. I mean, obviously the influence is there.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
but also like on that album, and your dad's playing in general, and you mentioned like the live versus the studio stuff. The one thing I always really appreciated about his work was that, especially on these, there's only 4 tracks on this record. Well, I mean, the first one
Yeah,
almost 15 minutes long, so they're
right.
stretching out. I always felt even on records he took chances. Um, he took risks when he played, and
hmm
one thing I always he's always the guitarist I when I'm trying to introduce jazz to my students. He's the guy I usually refer to because it's got that blues influence.
hmm
It's it's obviously he's virtuosic and technical, but he's not so overly technical that he's playing for musicians. It, to me, it always sounds like he's playing.
He 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 was wise enough to know that he was playing for. That's why the audience loved it. That's why people always thought. That's why audience loved him, and that's why, you know, people still buy his records, because they can hear it and they can still relate. You
Right.
know, to relate to what he's playing. And other guitar players can become. I mean, let me tell you something. If it was no West, or if it was no West or my dad, there would be no George Benson.
Exactly. I always thought of him as a combination and
hmm
his own person as well, but
Yeah.
absolutely, I hear that.
And you know, I mean, I've met so many rock guys. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan was a fan of my dad's.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I mean, you know, you meet. I remember a friend of mine was working with the Stones. I never met him, but he wanted to meet me. Not Keith Richards, the other guy.
Oh, black hair guy. Oh goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what,
Why
I
can't
can
I
see.
have it? With the
Huh?
faces. Uh,
Yeah, I can see his Ron Wood. Ronnie
Ron,
Wood.
thank you. I was
Yeah,
gonna
he
say,
wanted to meet me. So you know what I mean. We never met, but I had a friend that was working with the Stones, and you know what I mean. He was like, "Oh, Ronnie wants to meet you," and I'm the only one to meet because of my, you know, because he was probably listening to my dad. You
right.
know what I mean? So uh, my dad, as far as he was one of those kind of like Miles, he made it more accessible to listen to.
Exactly. I agree. And that's another, like, that's the guy. So when I teach my jazz history courses, Miles Davis for like,
Mm-hmm.
because it's human. There's a human element to it. It's relatable even to
Right.
non-musicians. You don't have to be a studied person in jazz music to appreciate necessarily like a Miles Davis or a Grant Green. I think.
Right.
I think. Similar. And the one thing I always liked about your dad's playing too, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, there were times where he would get himself into a moment that was maybe not technically correct. Like he would hit like some note that was maybe a little dissonant, but he would lock into that and repeat
Hmm.
it, repeat it, and repeat it until it just sounded. You're like, it's right, It just there's something.
Yeah, well, he didn't. My dad never listened to horn play. I mean, never listened to guitar players.
Right.
He was a horn guy.
Hmm. Can hear
You know
that.
what I mean? And horn players can do that.
Yeah.
They can hit that dissonant stuff. You know what I mean? You'd be like, okay, all right, I got it. I get it now. You know what I mean? Horn players would do that, and he listened to a like. I mean, obviously, I mean, he loved but Charlie Parker was his guy. But he listened to a lot of horn players, and it's funny because a lot of people think they always say, well, he didn't play the chords. Well, he did. He did play chords. You know what I mean. I learned how to play chords from watching him play chords. You know what I mean.
Right.
So he just had you know, it's it was again, there's different time and different era, but you had guys like him and Wes and Kenny and Barney and Jim Hall. I mean, when you heard these guys, you knew who these guys were.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You just mentioned first names, and I could tell you.
You know what I'm talking about, yeah. And you knew who these guys were, and everybody is influenced by somebody, but the key is taking that influence and putting your own spin on it and making it your own, because there's not one person that's playing an
Yeah.
instrument that wasn't influenced by somebody,
No.
no matter how great they are.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it doesn't necessarily have it doesn't have to be the same instrument,
Right.
because I mean, I take stuff from piano players, I take stuff from some horn players, guitar players. Well, like you know what I mean? And but you know, that's just how it goes. We take what we learn from people, and you always try to get something that somebody here on there, because I know that's so and so. I can tell who that is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think all those guitars you mentioned,
Yeah.
they
Had
all
that.
have, they all have that for sure, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it great. But like to your point, yeah, I mean the instrument is the tool,
Hmm.
but you could build a house or something using different tools and still get the same result, right? It's not
Right.
always.
Right.
So I do urge like uh, the students out there, and listen to other instruments. I mean,
Oh yeah.
just because you play a guitar doesn't mean it's always got to be a guitar player.
No, because first of all, especially with jazz, guitars wasn't even a solo instrument.
Right.
Exactly. So how they learned how to play jazz was from listening to horn players and piano players.
Yeah. I mean, really, you got your Charlie Christian, your
Charlie
Django.
Christian. Yeah,
Yeah.
Django.
But before then, there were guys, but yeah, and a
But
lot of
not playing, I mean, he had like, he had some guy, but not really playing the bebop lines. These bebop lines and stuff that you heard, they got those lines from horn players and piano players.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
know what I mean? That's where it came from. Now, Django was different. He got his stuff from something, but because Django had that gypsy, he probably got a lot of stuff from Stephen Grappelli.
Violin, just
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
and
Because you can hear a lot of the way his approach. I mean, you hear some of the other stuff, but I can hear like a little bit of Stephen Grappelli's approach in his playing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were kind of a team for sure. Even
Hmm.
though they're so different in so many ways.
Yeah.
Their upbringing was very different, but yeah, it's crazy. Just to go back to the record, I mean, uh, one person. I mean, it's a great cast, of course, but Joe Henderson on that album. I mean, it's like Joe.
He was a young guy on that record. He was
Yeah,
a baby in that bunch.
right. There's just something about him that makes every every record he's on better, you know.
Right.
And that contrast, you know, just the way they played. I just love hearing them. You know, they're two of my favorite soloists. Your dad and Joe
Mhm.
Henderson. It's just a pleasure to have to hear them in that same vein. But
But Joe's tone, man.
oh, that's the thing, right?
Joe had that tone, and he had that tone, and he could do that whisper thing, that saxophone whisper thing. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Cats, you don't find too many cats do that anymore.
you don't. No.
You know what I mean? Everybody wants to be honored, but playing as much stuff and as popular as they can. But this, you know, eh, he had a different type of. He was a real well-rounded player. And I love when he did that whispery stuff. You know, that just knocked me out.
Right, but then he could also do like a little bit of that overblowing,
Hmm.
and it's just like, whoa, you know, this guy,
Right.
he's the full spectrum, you know.
Yeah, he really was.
Yeah.
He really was.
So
Like I said, and he was a youngster, and I think he even had that many recordings under his belt when he did that album.
no, he was pretty new to the
Yeah,
recording
yeah,
that
he
time.
was.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I thought also what's always been interesting about your father's career was like not a ton of sideman records before he was recording as a leader that I'm aware of.
He did. Well, let me see. He did a record years ago before his stuff came out. He did a record called "All the Gin Is Gone," and that was with oh god damn, what's that guy's name? Oh
You know,
man,
that- sure.
God, all the gin is gone. I remember him as a kid because Jimmy Forrest.
Right. Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah, Jimmy Forrest used to also be in the Count. I think it was in either Count Basie's band or and Duke's band too.
Yeah, yeah. He was a big band guy. Right.
Yeah, but you know he was because I guess he was from St. Louis too. But yeah, you know, it's funny. I found out a lot of stuff about the, you know, some of the early stuff he played. But there was a few really early records out the stuff that he did with other people that really was before Blue Note. He had
Mhm.
did something with what's his name, Willie Dixon.
Oh wow. I love Willie Dixon. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. They did something together, which I found out. I was like, wow. You know, and then you know also he was Jack McDuff,
Right.
the
Right.
Honey Dripper.
Yeah.
You know, all that stuff he did with McDuff and Lou Donaldson and Stanley Turrentine up in Minton, you know. So, you know, Lee Morgan.
But pretty early on, Blue Note like locked in and said, this is the guitarist we're gonna put on our label," you know?
Yeah, because you know, he was because he was different than because, like I said, first of all, that his tone,
Awesome. Yeah.
you know, it was different from everybody else's tone.
Mhm.
You know, there was no, and then not only was his tone different, he wasn't even playing a big box. He was playing a 330.
Yeah. It sounds like a huge guitar, you
Yeah,
know?
but it was a 330, but it was very rounded and bitey.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It was just, you know, a lot of that has to do how you can get that bite and stuff like that from the guitar as a string gauge, you know?
Yeah.
Because you got to realize back in those days they didn't have tens or nines. I mean, they only know they had 11s, but they probably had 11s.
Which is
But you
considered
didn't have that. So I mean, you know he played his top E was a 14.
14. Wow.
Yeah, uh,
That's a heavy string.
yeah. But guess what? You can get that tone.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's why he was able to get that great tone. I mean, that's what I just what I grew up playing was 14s. And I guess that's why a lot of people think maybe that's why I got his tone because we played the same gauge strings. Those are strings that he used, so I used them.
Hmm.
Um, but Pat Martino used 15. His E string was 15.
I know, and he flew on those things.
Yeah, yeah. So
Right. And
so
was he using a heavier pick as well?
yeah, he used a heavy pick.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, he used a heavy pick. Yeah, I know about it. I mean, and a matter of fact, most of that stuff that they recorded back in those days. Everybody always try to tell me, they always try to, always ask me about his tone and how do you get that tone. And even George Benson was talking about how he got the tone wrong. I was there. I moved that damn amplifier. I know. I know.
They weren't light back then for sure.
Yeah, his tone came from his string gauge and his attack. Uh, I think George said he would turn all everything down and turn the treble way up. That's not what he did. That's definitely not what he did.
I almost hear more of a mid range than
He
a.
has a lot of mid range in there too. Yeah, and he used those Ampeg amps back in those days on those early recordings.
Hmm.
But a lot of people always thought they was Fenders, but they wasn't Fenders. They were Ampegs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's some similarities between the two for sure, but
Hmm.
they do have a specific sound.
Yeah,
That's
those
great.
Super Rockets. I had one at one time. I don't know. I don't even know what happened to it.
And those were heavy and not easy to repair.
Yeah, that was the problem with it. It was super. It had wheels. That was the heaviest amp that I ever lifted in my life.
Yeah.
It was heavier than the Twin.
I know. Those things are crazy. And now it's like like I'm gonna go out to my gig today and my amp is, maybe this big and as loud as can be and clear
Right,
and it's a
right,
DV Mark and it sounds perfectly fine for what I'm doing, it's
right. Yeah, I endorse these amps called Good Cell amps. These guy makes them, he custom makes them here in Atlanta. And I've been trying to get them for a while to make me just one little 12 in
yeah.
it. You know what I mean? Because that's all I really need. I mean, because you can just mic them if they're not loud
Right.
enough.
It's just a monitor at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean that's basically listen. That's basically what my amp is a monitor. Because look, when I'm doing a big show, I hate hearing hearing my guitar coming through the monitor. Hate it because the tone changes. It's
100%.
gonna be you're not getting the same tone from that you're hearing out of your amp out of that damn monitor because they're EQing stuff back there.
Right. It's I struggle with this with the sound guy. Sometimes I play in a lot of wedding bands and stuff.
Hmm.
Um and as a bass player, I just want it to be clean and clear. But,
Right.
but they're so in control of your sound. It got to a point where I'm like, just instead of me dragging out all my crap, just plug me in direct and and
Yeah.
because
Well, listen, man. Listen. I tell you, like I said, I always tell them, do not put me through the monitors. My amp is my monitor. That's what I want. I don't want because I'm really touchy about that. If my tone isn't right,
it ruins your night. It
yeah,
ruins my night. Yeah,
yeah, it does. And I don't, I can't, I just don't, it doesn't feel right. I can't play well when my tone is messed up. I
right.
just can't.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like if you were speaking right now and you had a different voice, it would be weird to you than your normal.
Right, right. Yeah. So
Anyway, I've
yeah,
kept you.
I always tell those guys, man, don't put just my amp is my monitor. Don't put me to the monitor. You know.
Awesome. Yeah, I've kept you a while, man. I don't want to keep you too long, but
Okay.
anything more about the album, about your father?
Oh, I got to, I don't, I'm sure, since I know that I got Susan Tedeschi singing on this cut on this album.
I did want to ask you about that. Yeah, she's brilliant, right?
She did a great version of What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just love, that was another thing when her and Derek are friends of mine, and I've known them for a while, just especially since I've been down in Atlanta. I've been down in Atlanta probably since 2007,
Mhm.
and I met them through this fellow that used to be here. He passed away a few years ago, but he was really a great guy. I don't know if you knew him, but his name was Colonel Bruce Hampton.
Oh, sure, with, Aquarium Rescue Unit.
Yeah, Jimmy and all those guys. Yeah, yeah,
Unbelievable. Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
Well, me and Bruce became really good friends when I moved down, and that's how I got a chance to meet like Derek and Jimmy Herring, O'Teal, and Jeff Sight. And all.
Monsters, right, yeah.
Yeah,
That's cool, and, so, yeah, I mean, that's a cool scene to be around for sure. O'Teal
yeah,
is, like, another level kinda guy for sure.
yeah. And the thing is interesting about O'Teal is that guy can really sing.
Yes, he can sing, I know.
And I've been ever since I've known that guy. I was man, you should sing more.
Mhm.
You really should because he has a great voice.
Yeah, you only mostly hear it when he doubles. It's
Scatting, yeah,
the George Benson kinda thing.
yeah, but he can sing. He has a great voice.
Yeah,
He really should use it more. You
absolutely.
know?
Yeah, awesome. Well, I would encourage everyone to check out the album. It's really something special, and I applaud you for it. It's first of all just to bring back the music of Burt Bacharach and to do it in the way you did it. Um, it is pretty awesome, you know. And I get a lot of these, and sometimes I'm always kind to the artist, but I think you made something special with this record.
Oh,
So
thank you, man. I
I
really
appreciate it.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
I really did. I
yeah,
mean, it was, I started working on. We started working on this record in I think 2020, and COVID hit,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
we had to shut everything down. We didn't finish the album until 2022,
Yeah.
and so and then with this last little bit, we finished these last 5 songs we put on in 23. But yeah, COVID completely shut it down, man. You know what I mean. But it was always something that I really wanted to do. I just always because I Burt Bacharach music has just always been so melodic to me.
Hmm.
I mean, it
Yeah.
was always something I wanted to do, and I'm glad I got a chance to do it. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a volume 3 though.
No,
I'm just I got people asking me, hey, what about volume 3? I don't know. I think uh, two I think is enough.
I mean,
Trust me, he has enough. He has enough material for
yeah, you could do that for the
volume
rest of your life.
20.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, we look forward to whatever the next thing is, man. Um, but I think you definitely serviced his music with you paid him a great tribute by the way you handled it. So
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I'm just and it was an honor to do it, and I was and I was lucky enough to have some great musicians on it, and just all the players that played on it, and just it made it easy.
right,
When you got the right players, and like I said, when we got Susan, because like when I knew I had to do that song, What the World Needs Now Is Love, because it was one of his biggest song, it's one of his biggest hits that he wrote.
now
Uh,
was she familiar with that song before? I mean, obviously familiar, but was she a Burt Bacharach fan or
I don't think I don't know any musician that's really not a Burt Bacharach fan. You know what I mean?
that's
Especially women, because because he wrote more stuff for women than guys.
yeah, he was a great writer for the female voice. Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm sure she was. When I told her that I wanted to ask her would she do it, and I told her I wanted her to do What the World Needs Now, Love Sweet Love, and she said yeah, and I was because I had already heard her voice singing it.
hmm
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it came out just exactly like I thought it would. I knew, and I knew it would come out great.
yeah. And I always like that idea of like instrumental albums that are mostly instrumental, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden there's the song with a with a vocalist. I mean,
right,
I have other vocals on the record too, but not quite like that. And it's like all of a sudden your ears like, whoa, what's happening here? And
right, right, right,
it
right.
better be really good because you're kind of taking us in a slightly different direction here. But it just fit.
But yeah, listen, man. Again, I am a child. I mean, basically from the 60s and 70s, 80s, but 70s is when I was starting to really cut my teeth. And back in those days, what made those records great was everything wasn't categorized.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what made those albums great because you had a little bit of this there, and you had a little bit of that there. You know what I mean? That's that. That's made. That's what made those records great records, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much today, everything is one way. Everything is that one way. You know. But
Yeah.
back in those days, man, you know, yeah, back in those days, it was but a gig. Back in those days, man, everybody they was allowed to really express yourself. We've been kind of as musicians, they've kind of corralled us musically,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
And
everything's got to be categorized, right?
yes, and
I mean,
what's the saying? There's only two types of music: good and bad.
yeah, and musicians really know that. There's very
Yeah,
few musicians that oh no, I only listen to this or I only play in this style. No, it's like, I mean, your dad was a perfect example. There's
right.
six different things going on. Like
My
you can
dad listened. My dad listened to everything. He loved funky stuff. He did a Burt Bacharach. He did a Beatles tune. He,
right.
you know what I mean. So, I, you know, it just like I said. Unfortunately, we're the age. But one thing I do know, I've been around this planet long enough to know that the business works in trends. And somewhere down the line, the trend is going to change again.
Yeah, everything's cyclical. I think you're right when you look
Yeah,
at the music.
yeah,
Yeah, and the
yeah.
other thing is I urge people because like this program is not just a jazz program at all. It's again, it's about like my next episode is gonna be about the Stones. So it's
Right, right.
which is cool. So I had Phil Oakes was the one before the
Hmm, hmm.
so you folk, you got jazz, but
Right.
even from my experience, a lot of the gigs that I have an opportunity, restaurants, bars, and we're playing jazz related music a lot of times, and people are like, "Oh, I didn't know I like jazz," when until they see
Right,
it.
right, 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 right,
Like,
right,
because it's
right.
good music. No, you like good music. Hopefully,
Exactly, exactly,
hopefully it's
exactly. I mean, like I said, it's only two types: good and bad. I like. Oh, let me tell you something, man. When I was coming up, I was a Johnny Cash fan as a young kid. I wasn't even a teenager yet.
Mhm.
But it was something about a dum chicka ding chicka dum chicka ding chicka dum chicka ding. I used to love that sound, man. You know what I mean? And being in St. Louis, I heard it
Yeah.
because you know what I mean. Because back then we didn't even have. I was listening to AM radio,
Mhm.
and they played everything on that AM radio.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of also sort of why everything is on the phone now, and
Right.
you know, but it is what it is what it is. But my hope is with the show is like, hopefully people gravitate to some different things. I'm sure there's a lot of people who've never heard of Grant Green,
Yeah.
and now hopefully there'll be a few converts, and they will, and it seems to
Mhm.
be working in that way. So I really appreciate you coming on, man. It was really nice to meet you, speak
Nice
with
to
you.
meet you too, man.
Yeah, and if you're ever, I'm in New Jersey. If you're ever in the area, New York, New York, New Jersey area, feel free to reach out.
I will. Next time we up there, well, I'll reach out, man. So come to the gig and hang out.
Yeah, and when you do have a gig in the area, so I write for a New Jersey jazz magazine, and
Hmm.
we'll do an article about the gig as well, most likely. So you know.
All right, dude. And I'll make I'll make sure try to get you a link so you can do maybe you can, oh well you got the album already. So you can, I was gonna
Yeah,
say you can do a review on that record.
yeah, it's great.
Okay.
So yeah, once again, thanks, and keep it going, man.
Thanks, man.
All
All
right,
right.
take care.
Take care.